In a world where jobs are how most people make money, one man, one desire, one challenge dares to break the mold. Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where we don't work for money. Money works for us. Coming soon. Viewer discretion advised.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network, where cash flow is king. Real estate investing, the means, so you can enjoy your retirement dreams. This is the show where we cut right to the chase. No sales pitch, no long monologues, just simple how-to real estate investing advice, so you can earn the passive income you need to enjoy your retirement today. And now, your host and chief old dog, Bill Manacero.
Welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network. I'm your host, Bill Manacero, and this is the show where 50-plussers and anyone else who wants to join us get solid, no sales pitch real estate investing advice to help generate real cash flow. This podcast airs twice weekly on Mondays and Fridays, and if you aren't already a subscriber, go to iTunes or Apple Podcast, type in Old Dogs, spelled D-A-W-G-S, find our podcast, and subscribe. Well, we have a great guest for you today. I'm really stoked about this. This is a guy who has an amazing story, major league real estate investors, and just very much focused on living the good life, that comes with financial independence through real estate investing. And I'm talking about Coach Chad Carson. And Chad is an entrepreneur, writer, and teacher who used real estate investing to reach financial independence before the age of 37. Soon after achieving financial independence, he traveled with his wife and 2 kids to live in Cuenca, Ecuador. Is that the right pronunciation?
That's right. You did well. Yeah.
All right, good. For 17 months. Chad also wrote a best-selling book, Retire Early with Real Estate. Now, was that with or through Bigger Pockets?
Correct. Yeah, they're the publisher.
All right, very cool. And hosts the popular podcast Real Estate and Financial Independence. When not writing about himself in third person, vying for the silliest dad award, playing pickup basketball, or publishing in-depth posts and podcasts at CoachCarson.com, Chad enjoys volunteering with a local nonprofit he co-founded to create a network of walking and bike paths in his hometown of Clemson, South Carolina. Well, Coach, welcome to the Old Dogs REI Network.
Yeah, thank you. That was quite an introduction. Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, man. Well, it's great to have you here. You live in a beautiful part of the country. I have a son that's a junior, going to be a senior. He's a running back. And of course, we're sending all kinds of packages out to Clemson. Just dreaming, okay?
Sure. Come on. We would love it. I actually played football at Clemson. That's what brought me here as well.
No way.
It's a wonderful school and a wonderful football environment, of course. Death Valley, the other Death Valley, the East Coast Death Valley, is where they play football down here. So yeah, come on. If you come visit campus, just look me up.
Oh man, I sure will. Well, my son, he just loves it. He'd love to play for Clemson. Man, it'd be a real joy. But anyway, we're not here to talk about football, are we? Although it'd be fun. But
we could do that. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I just, I stumbled across your website. It is just the most robust, just filled with information. I mean, tons of just great free stuff, and it's just amazing. You are a very prolific writer. Haven't had a chance to listen to your podcast, but I plan on doing that. But I was just, I did see your YouTube channel though, and that looked really cool. But yeah, you're just like all over the place, great content. And I thought, gee, this guy, he's got a great story. He's got to come on the show here. So, I would love to hear your story, sort of from, where were you born and grew up and how you eventually ended up in real estate.
Sure. Well, I was born in Noonan, Georgia, was where I'm from. So that's a metro Atlanta. If you go kind of near the Atlanta airport, 30 miles southwest, that's where I came from. And grew up there and ended up going to Clemson eventually and played football, as I mentioned earlier. And I was studying science, like biology, and I studied German, and I like to study abroad. And so it had nothing to do with business or finance or investing. But I did have the good fortune that my father had rental properties growing up, and he used to drop me and my brother off when we were in middle school. And this was, the whiny little middle schoolers that I was and my brother were. And he would pay us like $5 or $10 an hour, and it was worth twice as much as we were probably worth to do work. And he would have us. He'd say, "Here's some paint buckets. Here's this," and we'd paint, and we'd complain that everybody else is in the pool swimming or going out and playing with friends, and we're painting these old nasty houses and apartments. And he'd drop us off at a house that had a fridge that somebody had left full of food during the summer and in the heat of Georgia, and we'd have to clean it out and get all the maggots out of there. And I kind of hated real estate. Like, who would do this nasty stuff? This is horrible. And but then once I got into college, and I was like, wow, it's kind of, entrepreneurship and investing was interesting to me as much as anything, just the lifestyle, because you see that, hey, my dad was at my baseball games. He was coaching me and all these things, and he was involved, and I appreciated that as a father and somebody who's trying to be active as well. I saw that what you do, you need to do something you enjoy, but you also want to think about the lifestyle that's involved with that job as well. And so I was drawn to that freedom and flexibility of the lifestyle. And I decided, instead of I thought I would go to medical school, and I was interested in becoming a doctor. I decided I'm going to take a year or two off. Football's been kind of exhausting. And I'm just going to see if I can flip some houses. I'm going to see what I can do. And I can always use that skill later on in life. And once that genie was out of the bottle, I couldn't put it back in. It was being an entrepreneur, and I had very low overhead. I didn't have any college debt. I owned my car free and clear. So it was just a fun, exciting adventure for me. And 18 years later, I'm still investing in real estate. I don't flip as many houses as I used to, but I have rental properties, and that lifestyle is still the big draw for me.
Awesome. Well, you started as a flipper then. That was you had the sort of background and the construction side of things to be able to do that?
Not really, no. So I actually, but even before flipping, I did make money flipping houses, but I was just basically bird dogging and finding deals for other people, other investors, beginning with my father. So I went back and lived at home for about 10 months right after college. And I'd heard just through reading books and listening that you can find deals for other people. If you don't have the money, if you don't have the skills, like, what do you have? And I said, well, I have a lot of time, and I can talk to people, and I can hustle, and I can learn fast. And so I really didn't have the money or the know-how to do any of that stuff. So I would just look for vacant houses. I would look for fixer-uppers. I would call every realtor in town. I was just hustling. And then every time we found a deal that my dad would buy as a rental or as a flip, he paid me $2,000 during that first year.
Sweet.
And so that was I learned. I lived at home. I saved up some money. Eventually, we started butting heads a little bit, saying, I want to do it this way. You want to do it this way? And I said, all right, I'm going to go do my own thing. And I moved back up to Clemson, South Carolina. And a business partner and I started our own business, essentially flipping houses at that point. We still did wholesale properties and flip them quickly, but we learned and made a bunch of mistakes, but we started buying properties ourselves, finding other people to put up the money. We've done a lot of private money lending, investing with other people's self-directed IRAs, self-directed retirement accounts. So we just had to learn how to get the money, knowing that if I could find the good deal, if I could find a property that was well below full value or that could cash flow as a rental property, I could go out and find somebody with the money because I had something valuable by finding that good deal.
Now, you mentioned a business partner back in Clemson. How did you make contact with that person?
It's actually through football, believe it or not.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I was as I played football, I was a media company called TigerNet, was a fledgling internet business. Back then, internet businesses in 98, 99, they weren't really a thing. They didn't make any money. But he had an online forum where people would discuss football. And so he interviewed me one time, and we hit it off. And his dad had mobile home, a little small mobile home park, and he was interested in real estate too. And so we actually went to a couple of classes together, and he was just a real trustworthy guy, smart. And we decided but neither one of us had big resources. So we just basically took this business idea that we had of starting a house flipping business and eventually a rental business. And we just divided up the task 50-50. And I did the buying and the finding the money. He managed the remodels. He would sell them or rent them. And that was how we started. And we were able to kind of kick it off that way, just dividing and conquering.
Awesome. Now, did you have a sort of a day job while you were getting the business started?
Nope, that was it.
Wow.
That's why I said I had my Toyota Camry with cloth seats, that if I needed a backup plan, I was going to go. I was kind of a hiker and camper. I'm going to sleep in the back of the car if I have to. But
there you go. Set up a tent in the woods.
Set up a tent in the woods, whatever I got to. But it was for a couple of years it was scrappy. But that's also, I will say, not everybody has the advantage of starting that way. If you already have a family, if you already have debt and payments and things like that, it's a little harder to jump into that entrepreneur kind of vehicle. But for me, coming out of college, I didn't have any college debt. I'm used to eating ramen noodles and living cheap anyway, in college. And so for me, it was like the transfer over to say, well, how much do I really need to live? If I can make $500 a month, $1,000 a month, I'm living in the spare bedroom of a friend's house for a little while. It's like, it was really lean living until I could, 2 or 3 years later, when we finally started making a little bit more money, where I could pay myself a couple $1,000 a month in salary. That was how I got through that period.
Wow. And so you're looking for houses to flip. What year was this roughly?
2003 was when I started.
Oh, okay. So wow, before the big recession there. And so you, as you were, finding these houses, I mean, how are you financing them? I mean, if you guys didn't have any cash, where you just immediately had to go out and raise money?
Yeah, I mentioned private lenders earlier. So I had one professor. I didn't take any business classes until after I graduated, but I met a professor at Clemson it was a business management class, and he talked about how he also had rental properties. And so that perked my ears up, and I said, oh, that's interesting. And I just got to know him, started riding around with him a little bit. And eventually I made the question of proposition, saying, hey, I think I can find good deals. Here's what they look like. They're worth $120,000. I think I can buy them for $70,000 to $80,000. But the problem is I don't have any money. Like if I find that deal, is there some way we can divide that pie up? Like, could I give you a piece of the profit, or could I pay you interest? And he said, yes. Like, all right, let's figure this out. And initially he went to the bank, and he would go to the local bank where he had a relationship, and he would make the down payment. He would put up the remodeling cost. And that's how we did our first deal. We would just split it. He put up the money, but he didn't do any work. And we put up the deal and the work, and we got some profit as well. That was deal number one, but we evolved into more of a strategy where private lenders became our bank, where we actually taught him that he didn't realize that he could take part of his 401k and put it in a self-directed custodian and then loan us $100,000, and we pay him 10% interest. And then we did that deal over and over and over again, where we just paid him and a few others interest. And then if we were making $30,000 or $20,000 on a flip, and we paid him $4,000 or $5,000 in interest, that still made sense for us, because we could make money, he could make money, and we could all keep rolling.
Man. And you mentioned wholesaling too. Did you do that before or after you started the flipping business?
Sort of simultaneous. It was both. So some deals made sense for us to keep and flip. Others were outside of our territory. So we were in Clemson, South Carolina, and we looked in other towns like Anderson and Greenville. We kind of spread out, and sometimes there would just be a little package or low-end rental properties that we didn't have the capacity to manage, and so we might get them under contract, flip them to another landlord make a $10,000 flip fee for selling it to them, and then they would buy it and fix it up. So we would just kind of opportunistically figure out which ones made more sense for us to keep and flip ourselves, which ones made more sense to wholesale.
And how were you finding the properties? What what avenues were you using to locate properties that you could get a hold of? Were they all off market?
Most of them are off market. Although, I would say the answer to that question is everything. Like, we threw the whole kitchen sink. I think one of the most important skills as a real estate investor is to think about your investing as a marketing business. Like, it really is. It's a marketing and sales business. Even if you're outsourcing it to realtors or other people a long distance, if you think about it as a sales funnel, then you start asking the question, like, how can I get more opportunities showing up on my desk without me doing as much work? And so that's when we start thinking about marketing investments. Can we send direct mail to a list of landlords who recently evicted their tenants? That's an eviction landlord campaign, for example. Or can we send letters to people who are a couple payments behind on their mortgage and ask them, instead of letting the house go into foreclosure, what if you could sell it to me and you can move on from this situation? There's several different categories of like that, landlords, people behind on payments, but even also just driving for dollars, looking for vacant properties. The same things I did in Noonan, Georgia when I first started. We probably have 6, 7, 8 different things going at one time, and you never know which one of those is going to work the best. But you just keep investing your time and money into those lead generation channels, such that you get these opportunities showing up on your desk all the time, and you're not so desperate to say, "Oh, I got to do a deal." You're more like, which one of these makes the most sense for me, and you can say no or no thank you to the ones that don't make the most sense, and that really makes you a better investor, because you have that abundance of opportunities, and you're not so tempted to make bad decisions by buying bad deals.
Sure. And did you, how many did you actually flip over, let's say a year period, once you got started and then started to, refine it a little bit?
Yeah. The first couple of years, it would be 5 or 6. And then by 2007, we really ramped it up. And this is maybe part of the good follow-up story as well, because 2007, 8, 9, start getting into the Great Recession. We just timed it perfectly by really ramping our marketing up and buying. We had 33 closings in 2007.
Wow.
So we were, a lot of those are flips. Some of them were rental properties. But we really pushed it and bought and sold, and also kept a lot of properties. Almost all of those with non-traditional financing, so private financing, seller financing, lease options. Got really creative with the financing, which is actually part of the salvation of not having a really bad result as we went into the recession. So we had long-term financing, or we had individuals that we could sit down with and say, all right, the whole economy has changed. How can we make this work for everybody? Whereas if you'd had almost all bank loans and they were balloon notes or things like that, it would be a much different story. And it was a much different story for a lot of investors who went into the Great Recession, and then things changed and their financing got pulled out from under them. That's how a lot of people went out of business.
And when did you actually start buying, or at least taking some of those homes as rental properties? Was that from the very, very beginning, or is that something you started to figure out later on?
It was a couple years in. I mean, I think we recognized that we didn't have enough reserve cash, basically, to feel like we could get a rental property and afford the worst case scenario. What happens if the heating and air goes out? What happens if the roof goes bad? What happens if a tenant moves out for 6 months and we got to keep paying this person this mortgage? So I think it was 2004. The end of 2004 was our first purchase. So that's about 2 years after we started, and then some more trickled in. I would say 1 or 2 more the next year. By 2007, I think probably a third of the properties we bought, I think we had 50 units by the end of 2007. So we bought a lot of rent, because some of those 33 closings we had were multi-unit properties, some small duplexes, quadplexes, and so we really accumulated them fast. And some of those we had intended to flip, but then the rug of the market got pulled out from under us, and we said, all right, we've got to learn how to be landlords now, and let's figure this thing out. So part of that was deliberate. Part of it was we just have to figure this out and make it work, because the economy, that's what they've given us.
Now, you came up on the big recession. What happened when it hit, and where were you at in your business?
So 2007, we did flip a lot of properties in 2007. And so we accumulated a lot of cash. Like, the best thing we did, and maybe this is a good advice for people who are going into whatever we might find in the next 5 to 10 years, is to having a good cash position when you have these illiquid properties is, I think, a really wise thing to do. It ended up it was just kind of a product of our frugality. Like, I still was living in cheap places. I was living in a fourplex that I rented out to other 3 units. And so I had no house payment. I was house hacking. I was living in a place that produced more income than my cost. And so I really saved a lot of money. Our business saved a lot of money. We didn't spend much of it. So we just had a pretty big reserve that we ended up needing, because we bought some properties that we underestimated the repair cost by $10,000 or $20,000, or the cash flow. We thought we were really we underestimated maintenance and capital expenses on some of the rental properties. We were just naive, not understanding how much it would really cost to own an old mobile home park or an old rental property. And so we were negative. We were feeding properties for a couple of years there, for sure, and having to supplement some of that feeding with our reserves, or with owner financing some houses, flipping a few few houses where we could here and there. So I think it was kind of like treading water for us for a few years. And finally, the good thing that was, though, like, you get through 2011 and 12, on the other end of this, there's a lot of opportunities for the people who are left standing or the people who get back into the market. There's a ton of opportunities during that kind of period. And we still had relationships with private lenders who are also kind of nervous about putting their money in the stock market and having these big ups and downs. So they like those constant returns that we could produce by having rental income. And so we were able to build on what we had after we kind of buttoned down the hatches and made sure we would survive through all that. We were able to expand and replace. We've gradually been replacing our worst properties ever since then, but we would sell some, buy some more, sell some, buy some more, grow a little bit, eventually to the point where instead of having 50 units in 2007, right about where we are now is about 110 units. And so we kind of doubled down on some of the things that were working, like multi-unit properties in a college town where we are in Clemson tend to work pretty well. The university was growing. We were finding good deals on old multi-unit properties. So that became more of our niche at that point. We kind of transferred away from flipping houses and more to multi-unit buy and hold. It's not everything we do, but it was kind of a big component of what we do.
That's awesome. I mean, it sounds like you have a lot of different types of asset class investing. You did. I mean, from wholesaling to flipping to buy and hold rentals. It sounds like mobile home parks, and I mean, it just seems like you've covered a lot of ground there. A little bit too much at times. Yeah, the common theme was all in one location. I feel like we were like a big fish in a small pond. We're a small little market, and so you had to be a little bit more of a generalist, where you did a little bit of this, a little bit of that, as opposed to if you're in a big city. If you're in Metro Atlanta, you can say, I only buy this asset, and this is all I'm doing. And there's so much supply that you can do that. Whereas we're in a kind of a smaller market where you had to do a little bit of everything. Did you ever get into lease options or other types of financing with some of the properties that you sold? We did, yeah. That was kind of our transition from being flipping houses to buy and hold. Is that we recognized that we would lease a property to a tenant, and if we could get that tenant to buy the property, many of them wanted to buy property, so we would help them work on their credit or help them work with a mortgage broker who would help them build their credit up. That if we could sell it to them 2 years later, instead of having to have that property sit vacant and try to flip it, we would save on the commission. We wouldn't have to pay a real estate commission. We would save on holding cost. Sometimes we could do a good remodel, but we wouldn't put like all the bells and whistles, the brand new, everything in the kitchen. We would just do a nice remodel and everything's safe and functional and works. And so our profit margins were much better leasing them and with an option to buy, and then they would buy them from us. And so it's almost, you can think about almost like a delayed flip in between a flip and a rental property, where we did these short-term holds where we would hold them for 2 or 3 years, sell it, make a chunk of money, reinvest that money in some other properties. It was a really nice way for us to not have to have the grind of buy, flip, because that's it's a never-ending treadmill when you're doing that. And I really liked the consistency and the regular nature of the cash flow of a buy and hold portfolio, and that was the way we transitioned to it. And you must have had, when you were sort of the peak of your flipping, you must have had a number of construction crews, I would imagine, that you had to oversee in the process. Yeah, we did. We had a couple. We had one key contractor who did a lot of work, and then if we would kind of judge based on how much we were keeping him busy, if we were probably going too much and too fast. And so every once in a while we'd have to bring in on some extra contractors. But for sure, yeah, we were definitely, if I go back and look at our bookkeeping for those years, the amount of money we paid to contractors, we really kept a few people in business for sure. Oh, that's great. Did you have difficulties with that as well? Yeah, I think finding and maintaining a good relationship with contractors is probably one of the most difficult parts of this business. It's it is a rental property portfolio now. We try to have one or two good handymen who can do a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and that's always helpful. But getting, right now, for example, in 2021, there's so much construction going on that if you're a good contractor, you're a good general contractor, you have more business than you can handle.
And of course, you're going to go to the easier stuff. You're going to do new construction. You're going to do the $100,000 remodels on somebody's addition to their house. You're dealing with us as an investor and somebody who's going to, do a $30,000, $40,000 remodel, and it's complicated. It's this remodel where you're going to rip out stuff. It's just not as easy to find people to do that. So it's definitely challenging. And the only way I know to do that is to have good relationships. This is a people business. And if they trust you and they know that you're always going to pay them on time and they know you're a long-term vision person, you're not going to just sell them out just for just to make a little bit extra money on this project. You're going to try to make everybody money and you're going to work together on things. I found that attitude, whether you're working with contractors, private lenders, your tenants, whoever, we're all on the same team here. I think people recognize that attitude, and hopefully that helps you build a team that you can maintain that team over the long run instead of having a lot of turnover.
Yeah, that's great. Great approach. Do you guys self-manage all your rentals?
We did for a while. And then so that became, as we got more rentals, that became challenging. So we had a bookkeeper she was a great bookkeeper, and we could recognize some talent in her, and she kind of grew herself into more of a in-house property manager for us for a while. And she would do our collections. She would do I still signed the leases and I still made the final decisions on rentals, on who was going to rent the property, but she would do all the 90% of the legwork. And that worked really well up until a few years ago. And she decided to retire. She had some other things she wanted to do. So we've since then outsourced almost all. I think we have like 10 units that are still kind of special cases that we self-manage, or they're either notes that we finance to somebody who just doesn't take much management, or it's just a house that's easy to a long-term tenant in another town where this management company doesn't work. We still have maintained a couple, but most of them are with two different property management companies here locally, as we've divided them up between them. And it's honestly was a really nice transition. I'm enjoying not being the person in the middle of all that. And it's allowed, my trip in 2017, 16, 17, or 17 and 18, when we went to Ecuador for 17 months, having everything outsourced and having other people doing a lot of it, and me still maintaining a relationship and understanding what's going on and paying some bills here and there. It was night and day. It makes it really nice. It's actually truly a passive business at that point, as opposed to doing things yourself.
Is that when you decided to sort of move into the Coach Carson role?
I've been doing that on the side since 2009. And
wow.
I'm kind of a learning junkie. I just enjoy learning. I enjoy reading books. And so I would go to my local real estate meetups and classes, and they'd ask me to teach a class. How did you find these deals? Can you teach about marketing? And so I just started doing that because I enjoy learning, which means I also enjoy teaching. And so that started just as a hobby and turned into a little bit of consulting. People wanted me to help them do their business. But eventually I learned that I'm writing all these things for like 15 people in my local group. I'm writing all these articles and things. Why don't I put that on the internet, on a blog? And so that turned into a blog that eventually spread, and people started reading it through the magic of the internet. And then eventually into a podcast and a YouTube channel. And what's maintained that for me is, like, again, investing in real estate is fun. I enjoy it. I spend a lot less of my time on that now by choice. I don't want to spend all my time on the real estate. It's a more passive investment. And so it's opened up time in my schedule to say, all right, what do you want to do? Like, what do I enjoy? Well, I enjoy traveling with my family. I enjoy being a dad when they get off the bus. But I also enjoy teaching. I enjoy learning. I enjoy growing. And so this I can teach the things, the good and the bad of what I've learned, and help other people become wealthy and help other people get that same free time. I get a kick out of knowing that there's hundreds or thousands of people who are benefiting from some of this information that, like, you're sharing and I'm sharing, and that we can all collectively do better. I think that's pretty fun.
Yeah. Well, you do a great job of it. I mean, it's quality stuff, and
thank you.
Really, a lot of thought goes into it. And I'm looking at your story here, and you've got 100+ units. You've got all these other things that you're doing, and you still have time to do something like that. I'm just amazed. I'm just going, gee whiz, this guy is like a dynamo here.
Oh, thanks.
But really good stuff. Well, I would imagine that. Just the way you just sort of jumped in here, and I'm sure you learned a lot of things along the way as you experienced it, from flipping to all the other aspects of things that you've done. What would you say was probably maybe your biggest mistake, something that you really learned from, and it kind of helped sort of change the way you did business?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think going back to 2007, I could kind of elaborate more on that story. I feel like when you're a new investor, whether you're, brand new in your 20s like I was, or whether you're starting in your 60s and you're brand new, like either way, it makes sense to model other people. Like that's how we learn. As a kid riding a bike or learning to walk or learning to talk, we model other people. That's what we do. So I did that. Like my business partner and I would go to classes and we'd see other successful, quote, successful investors who were doing a lot of business. They were flipping a lot of houses. And I think the mistake we made though was instead of emulating how they did things, paying attention to the skills they have or the things they do, we sort of borrowed goals from other people. And so when you borrow goals, like for example, flipping a certain number of houses or buying, owning 100 units because that's what Chad does, like when you borrow goals from somebody else, it disconnects you from the reason you actually do the business. Like, why do you do the business? You do the business for personal reasons. You do the business because you want more autonomy, want more freedom. You want to travel. Maybe you want to start a garden. Maybe you want to be in start a nonprofit in your town. Maybe you want to be more present as a parent. And so like I disconnected the business model of real estate investing with the purpose of doing it in the first place because I borrowed goals from other people. And that led to us getting ahead of ourselves in 2007. It sounds impressive sometimes to say, oh, I did 33 closings, or you listen to a Bigger Pockets podcast, there's always, or any podcast, there's always, this person did 100 deals in 2 years. How impressive is that? And the lesson for me though, is like that volume and growing and getting bigger by itself is not a success. Success is when this business at whatever level contributes to what your purpose is, why you did this in the first place. And what I've learned since then is that for many people in my audience who I'm talking to in my blog and in my podcast, getting 2, 3, 4, maybe 10 houses, getting them paid off, having a nice little cash flow, having a simple business, and spending most of their time doing something else other than real estate is actually very successful. And yet those people don't seem as successful because they don't have as many properties, as much volume. And I guess so that it kind of changed my philosophy about how you need to start with that, what matters to you. That's my motto on my podcast and YouTube channel is do what matters. Like focus on that first. And then we'll come back and we'll build a business model around that. And very often that's being deliberate, keeping things small, keeping things low overhead. You don't need to get big and fancy and impressive. Often that's an ego play. I'm not saying everybody who gets big and impressive has an ego. What I'm saying is it's anything you do beyond what's necessary needs to have a reason. Like, why are you doing that? Are you doing it for fun? Are you doing it because it's just exciting? And if that's the case, great. Like people climb mountains because they're exciting. That it makes sense, but they do it. That's great. If you want to build a 1,000-unit business because that's exciting to you, great. But just don't call it financial independence. Don't say you're doing that because you have to in order to have freedom and flexibility, because you can have tons and tons and tons of freedom and flexibility. In fact, probably more so the smaller and the simpler you keep your business.
That's great. Wow. How old are you again, man? You sound like an old dog.
41, yeah. I hang out with a lot of old dogs. I'm just reflecting what people who are wiser than me said, for sure.
No, really, very, very wise, I'll tell you. That's awesome. What is something, let's say maybe you adopted early on that really ended up just working great for you? I mean, it could be a success story. It could be, maybe a strategy or something of that nature that really made a difference for you in the long term.
Yeah, I read a book called 7 Habits of Highly Effective People right when I got out of college. And I feel like that was one of the luckiest moments of my life, getting a really good quality book like that early in my career. And one of the ideas, and that there's a lot of good ideas, but one of those 7 habits has to do with interpersonal skills. And I think one of them is listen first, then try to be understood. And you don't want to just talk first, then listen. You want to listen first, then understand. And the other was think win-win. And so try to do business and deals that are win-win for everybody. And I think those are just 2 principles, but they have to do with relationships and they have to do with interpersonal skills. And just taking those and applying those, for example, to my business partnership, like my 50-50 business partnership with my business partner, who've now been together for 18 years working together, is the best thing that ever happened. Like that, the synergy that happens because we treat each other well, we trust each other, is just hard to calculate. It's just amazing the value and the speed that trust of a relationship like that, of a relationship with a private lender who you trust your private lender. They can give you money quickly because they know you're good for it. Same with a bank relationship, same with the contractors we talked about. So I think it was just something I read in the book early in my career, but now looking back, the value of those relationships and of trust and of being trustworthy is just, you can't even calculate it. It's unbelievable. And yet I think a lot of the times the tendency is to try to move faster with people, like treat people like systems. Like when you're talking to a seller, you're negotiating with a seller, instead of listening to them and taking your time, you're trying to get right to the deal. Let's cut to the chase. Let's make this deal happen, as opposed to, let me listen, like, let me see what they're trying to accomplish here. And maybe I can help them solve their problem. Maybe I can't. But I think it's less a technique, and it's more of a framework of how you work with people. And it's nothing tricky about it. It's probably intuitive. It's probably something our grandmothers would have told us when we were little, Mm-hmm. But it's such a key component of the success, that any success we've had in our business has been trying our best, imperfectly often, but trying our best to implement that kind of idea.
That's great. Now, your portfolio, do you buy for the long term? It sounds like the way you've been talking that seems to be the focus, is just holding on to some good properties. And yep. But I didn't know if you're constantly turning them over, or you're just trying to get them to the point where you've got these quality properties that you're going to hold on to for the long term.
Yeah, I kind of it's a long term for sure. And the best analogy I've heard, I think I got this from John Schaub, a teacher and an investor down from Florida, that I look at my portfolio as more like a herd of cattle, or maybe a herd of goats. I don't know, but you have this herd of animals that are your livelihood. They're providing for you, and some of them are your best. They're your ones that produce. If you have a dairy farm that produce your most milk or something. But some of them, every once in a while, one gets sick and it's just not a good producer. So we do cull the herd a little bit. We would rank our properties and say, all right, what's the best properties based on location, low maintenance, they attract the best tenants tend to stay the longest, whatever qualities are important to you with your portfolio, we would rank those. And the ones that are consistently at the bottom, we either try to solve the problem, like if we have a bad financing on that property and that's what's causing the issue, all right, let's refinance it or let's pay it off. Or if it's just a problem you can't solve, it's just right next to a bad commercial area that's just not going to be appealing to your tenants, or if it's just a construction of that house is really low quality, the materials are bad, you're always going to have problems with it. So then we would just sell those and then replace them with others. And that's at least at this point, that's our attitude going forward. We don't see any, we might sell off a few here and there, but we're doing more of just keeping what we got. We're making some loans to other investors kind of to supplement that and make some interest as well with some excess cash we have. And that's just a nice, patient, long-term view of is what we're trying to do now.
Are you doing anything to sort of prepare if there is going to be a market correction, which, a lot of people are saying it's inevitable, but anything different strategically in your business?
Saving cash, same thing that worked before. We keep a big reserve, probably more than we need to, but I always try to tell people, at least like in your personal life, you save 3 months of expenses. Maybe, at least if you look at your mortgage, taxes, insurance, maintenance, add all those up and multiply it times 3, you ought to have at least that much sitting in the bank. And as you grow, as you get more mortgage payments and as you get more taxes and insurance, that cash hoard should grow some. And so that, most of the time that money's just sitting there. We never use it. In fact, we haven't used it since 2009, and yet it's still sitting there. And that's you could say that's bad cash management. That money could have been applied more, could have been getting a return, but I think it's like an insurance policy. So the opportunity cost on that cash sitting there is the insurance policy on the uncertainty of the future, on what's going to happen. Who knows what I'm not smart enough to figure out what's going to happen. I don't think most people are. And so that's cash reserves are a big deal. Relationships, going back to that, like, do I have private lenders who, if I had a great deal that fell in my lap, can I make 3 phone calls and raise $500,000 to do that? Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. I've proven myself with some people. And then the third piece of that, I think, is just studying your market, staying in touch with what's going on. Maybe my market changes. Maybe there's some fundamentals that make me think I need to start selling some properties and go to a different market. I think that's a never-ending process as well.
That's great. Is your dad still an investor?
He is, yeah. He's still in Noonan, has properties in Noonan, Georgia, and we still compare ideas and talk about things. And he actually moved up to South Carolina, so they're my brother and I both here in South Carolina, and so they live here and have properties back in Georgia, and we're still it's a great benefit when you have family members who you can collaborate with and talk to each other about. So he's still doing that as well.
Great. That's great. He must be blown away with, where you've come. Seriously, that's pretty awesome.
I took and ran with a lot of the ideas he started with. So he and my mom in their own right have done great, and really happy for them too.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of old dogs here, we have an audience that we really focus on, although we have a lot of people that listen that are younger, but our audience are really those people that are, 50 years of age and older. Some are approaching retirement, and, they're getting concerned. They're looking at their numbers and thinking, wow, I'm going to need to do something here to kind of get the cash flow that really have the retirement that I'd hoped to have. And Then there's those that are already in the retirement, space that are either they have a nest egg that they're they're tapping into. They'd rather draw interest off of that and keep the nest egg intact. What advice would you have for those folks that that are looking at real estate as a means to be able to meet those needs?
Yes, I love that question. And I wrote a book called Retire Early with Real Estate, and it was targeted more towards the early retirement community, but I think it applies perfectly, one of these core ideas, to any people in their 50s or 60s who are trying to figure this retirement thing out too. You touched on not touching the principal. Like, I think one of the most underappreciated parts of living off of having a core part of your retirement portfolio be real estate is that you don't have to touch your principal. That you're not eating the golden goose, and so that if you can I'll just give simple numbers. If you can spend $100,000 and make a 6% return on your property, and I think getting beyond the details, like that's, if you look for good locations, good markets, it's not possible in every market, but it's possible even to pay cash for a property and make a 6-7% return. And so if you can do that, you can make a $6,000 per year cash return on your $100,000. And if you compare that to what's safe to do with the stock market or with bonds that are making 1% or annuities, whatever those make, that's just night and day. Some people would say, well, yeah, you got to do work, you got to manage your properties, but it's a business that is pretty easy to outsource. It's pretty easy to have managers doing it. When I was in Ecuador for a year and a half, I spent 30 minutes to an hour per week on 110 units. That's with other people doing all the work. So it's a very, very part-time job once you get it rolling. But I guess to the point of your listeners who are saying, if you're already considering real estate or if you're on the fence about it, that core component of retirement income and the fact that you don't have to touch the principal, and if you buy properties in good locations, they tend to keep up with inflation. There's no guarantee, but they tend to keep up with it because construction cost of materials and boards and roofing, those things are going up, right? So if you're essentially like buying into long-term construction materials and the cost of building a house, and as long as the cost of building a house keeps going up, your existing home also keeps going up in value, and the rents tend to go up in value. And so therefore you have an inflation hedge built into that. So if you make $60,000 from your rentals today because you invested $1 million in those properties, you're probably going to make the equivalent of $60,000 10 years from now. And that's a really hard thing to do in the retirement world, like to find some vehicle that can produce enough income, can make sure it's secure and safe, can make sure you have enough time to enjoy your retirement, and make sure it keeps up with inflation. Like when I talk to people, I'm like, well, isn't that what real estate does? Like, that's pretty amazing. You can do all of those things. And I'm not saying you shouldn't diversify. And I like having index funds and other, some cash and maybe some, bonds or something else. But I'm a real estate person. I like real estate. And I think that's so my bet, I think I'm just affirming what people are, they're listening to your show, they're interested in it, and you're teaching great stuff. It's just this is a good place to be. And it's probably, if you're starting later in life, this is probably the only place that you need. I mean, to go build a stock portfolio in 5 years or 10 years to retire off of is a really difficult thing to do. You're dependent on the whims of the market. Whereas this is something you can get a little bit of elbow grease. You can go find the properties. You can build a team. Yes, this takes work, but I actually think that's actually an advantage. Like, you control your destiny as opposed to letting the market control everything about your whole retirement destiny.
That's great. That's great. I was just kind of curious too, on your properties, do you try to accelerate the mortgage payoffs on those properties?
I have. We didn't do that early on. So I kind of think about it in a couple stages. So when you're in that maximum growth stage where you're just trying to accumulate wealth and build wealth, it doesn't make quite as much sense mathematically to go pay off 4% mortgages. It just doesn't make as much sense. But once you get to a certain stage, either you're ready to retire or you're just ready to take some chips off the table and reduce your risk and increase your cash flow. I do think it makes sense to do something like a debt snowball, where you take all your cash flow from all of your properties, and instead of paying extra on all 10 properties, pay all of that extra income on one property and pay that off in like 3 years, and then take the extra income now you have from that one and pay off the second one. Within a 5-year period, you can pay off several properties, and now you have those paid off permanently. You've increased your cash flow. You don't have to be quite as leveraged, and you don't have to have 20 properties that produce the same amount of income. You can have a smaller number. And I found, not for everybody, but I think for most people who are more risk minded and simplicity minded, that's a pretty good strategy.
Yeah, I mean, it on the surface it looks, like the smart way to go. Be free and clear, just boom. It's just your cash flow. But there's also sort of the tax side of it too. If you really are generating significant income with those properties, don't you lose the tax advantage?
A little bit. I mean, but the way I look at tax advantages is you're getting a tax advantage because you're losing money. Like, you're having to pay interest. Like, interest is a loss. So really what you're doing is you're just replacing yourself with a bank. So I'm going to make 4% interest on this position that I'm paying off. And so the question I ask myself is the risk reward ratio of me getting 4% interest worthwhile? Like some people do. And this is almost a no risk position to pay your loan off. It's almost like buying. I'm not saying it's quite as low risk as a treasury bond or something, but it's pretty darn close. I mean, you're reducing your risk big time, and so I think it's not as much of a tax play, and it's more of an investment play to say, the 4% I'm making paying that loan off minus the tax benefits I lost because the government was helping me pay part of that interest by giving me a subsidy, or a tax write-off. Like, whatever that net number is my return on that risk-free investment I just made. And if I'm making a 3.5% risk-free investment as opposed to the 0.5% or 1% that are out there, like, that's a pretty good delta. And so I think putting it in this appropriate risk bucket is more the way I look at it.
Good. A really good way to look at it. Well, you're still a really young guy here. You got a long time ahead of you. And what's sort of your long-term plan, 10, 20, 30 years down the road?
I don't even know. It's like when I was 25 and I had 10, I was like, I want to retire early. I want to have financial independence. And I think now it's less about the real. I want to keep improving my real estate portfolio. I want to keep teaching other people how to do it. I would love to know that, some number of people have benefited from things I'm learning and teaching. But then I've also, it's more looking kind of legacy wise. I have kids. I want to make sure they grow up and have a good relationship with them, that I'm at the stage you're at where you're going with your kid to college and maybe you're helping them and try to still have a good relationship with them at that point. And then also I think a lot more now, and I feel like a rookie in this territory, but about giving back, and both with my time and my money. My wife and I, half the profits we make from our Coach Carson business, when we sell courses or have advertising, we give away we have a charitable trust, and we we're just deciding how to give that money away. Like I'd love to give away $1 million over the next 20 years if that was possible. And then also figure out ways to make a difference in my community. We have a local nonprofit building trails and helping walkability. And I'm kind of passionate about the way the infrastructure has been built in towns. And I feel like I'm not opposed to driving cars by any means, but I think it's really tilted. Most of our infrastructure building in all our cities over the last 50 years has been how fast can we get people from one place to another in a car, as opposed to thinking about places and how do we build places safely so people can enjoy where they live, so they can connect with the community. But also financially speaking, a lot of cities are building these big highways and roads without thinking about the long-term liabilities of those, that they're going to cost millions and millions to replace, and we don't have the tax revenue to do that. So I'm invested in my local community, helping with that and affordable housing, and that stuff's not a business; it's just a kind of social business and nonprofits, and it's a new area of learning and a lot of fun. So I'm spending a lot of time on that too.
That's awesome. Are most of your investments in the Clemson area? I mean, are they within close distance of where you live?
Yes, they are. They're all within. We have a few that are 20 miles away, but almost all right here. So diversification is another thing that we've been thinking about. If a big tornado comes through town, we don't want to have all our properties. We have insurance, but it's nice to know that getting more stock portfolio, more index funds, more. I've even bought a little Bitcoin, believe it or not. That's so it just is a dabbling. I'm trying to diversify into different things so that I'm not all correlated with one town, one asset class. Trying to diversify a little bit.
That's great. That's great. Well, we've come to sort of the end of our interview here. We have a tradition we call our Wrap It Up. In that, I ask you a series of quick questions about resources that have been of value to you that you can share with our audience. So if you're ready, we can go ahead and wrap it up.
Let's do it.
All right. A favorite real estate book?
I like the book Building Wealth One House at a Time by John Schwab.
John Schwab. Yeah. Great book. Awesome. Yep. How about just your favorite general business book?
It's actually one I just did a review on my YouTube channel that's going to come out in a couple of weeks, but it's called Deep Work by Cal Newport. And it's about work, obviously, but it's about how you approach the different types of work you do, and how most of us these days, it's really easy to get wrapped up 60-70% of your time doing emails and messaging and things that are really not that productive, and not focusing on your main work that adds value to whatever it is you're doing. And Deep Works is sort of a why-to and a how-to book, and it's excellent. It's one of the best books I've read in a long time.
I've heard it. I haven't read it. I've had other people say it was a great book too. Awesome. How about would you say a most valuable website that you go to on a regular basis?
Can I say my tax assessor? I go to my tax assessor like all the time, from looking up who owns that property so I can send them a letter, to looking up my own taxes, or I look at map. I'm a map nerd. I love the GIS maps on my tax assessor, and I can figure out all sorts of things. So I don't know.
Hey, that'll pass. Now, are all your properties in the same county?
No, we got most of Pickens County, South Carolina, but we have a couple in Oconee and Anderson as well.
That's funny. This is the first time I've ever heard this one. That's great.
It's valuable and free.
The county assessors. I love it. How about a favorite app? Anything on your phone that that you use and that helps you, whether personally or business wise?
Yeah, I was trying to think about that one. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but I think that's probably pretty obvious. I have a ring, actually, it's kind of like those smart watches that people wear that tell them how many steps you take and all that. It's called an Oura ring, O-U-R-A. Mm-hmm. And you wear this ring and it keeps your pulse. It lets you know how you're sleeping at night, and it's also lets you know the temperature at night, and it has all these vital signs. And I just find it fascinating from a kind of optimization of the fundamentals, as you might think of it as, like, what are your sleeping, your exercise, your sleep patterns. I think those things it's kind of like with sports. You gotta, John Wooden used to say, to be a good basketball player, you gotta learn to tie your shoe first and put on your socks. And I find like just being a good human being has to do with these physical fundamentals. And I have often not done that well, like I've burned both ends of the candle and lose sleep. And last few years, I've tried to really focus more on having those fundamentals. And this little app and this ring have been pretty helpful for me to do that.
It's a ring, huh? Seriously,
Yeah.
on your hand. Oh my gosh, I haven't even
and
heard
it has three sensors on there, and it does even a little bit better than the watches because it fits pretty snugly, and it can get some different pulses and different things that the others don't do. And I find with a watch, it's not something I'm going to wear as often, so the ring just works for me.
Very cool. That's neat. I haven't heard of that before. How about a favorite quote?
I've got so many of them, but I thought about one just for our audience I think will appreciate. There's a quote by Byron Katie, and it says, "The greatest stock market you can ever invest in is yourself. Finding this truth is better than finding a gold mine."
I like that. That's great. Good
So
one.
people are listening to the podcast. They're improving themselves. I honestly, like I've invested in real estate over the years. I've invested in marketing, for my business to buy properties, and all of those were really good returns on investment. But my time and money spent on myself, on investing in myself, whether that's health or whether that's educating myself, has been easily the highest return on investment. I mean, it's not even a question. And so I think that's probably, you might hear some of like the self-help gurus that get a little too much with that kind of stuff, but it really, I think if you make a practice, both invest your time and your money and whatever it is, you're professionally, whether it's your health, whether it's your real estate investing, it's a wonderful return on investment over time. And I happen to find it a lot of fun too. So there's that.
That's great. And our final question, if you lost everything, all your assets, and you had to start over knowing what you already know, and you only had $1,000 in cash, what would you do with that $1,000 to relaunch your real estate investing business?
I would call my private lenders. I would call those people I have trust who've trusted me in the past. And I'm assuming that's still intact. Maybe it was just a nuclear explosion that blew up my houses or something, But I would call them up and I would say, "Hey, I'm starting back over, and I'm gonna go out and hustle, and I'm gonna go find some more deals, just like I have before. Are you ready? What do you want to? What makes sense for you? What's a win-win for you?" I would start with the money, and then once I had the money lined up, they would put up all the money, and I would give them what's fair and what they need in order to make it satisfying and safe and get a good return for them. And then I would hustle, spend my days finding more properties, and I'd just build it back up.
That's great. Are these hard money lenders, or these are more real private individuals? Private
individuals. Yeah.
Awesome.
So I think that's, it could be the same principle with the bank. You go back to your banker. I've just found, you tend to pay a little bit of a premium. Like I pay 6% interest in some cases, sometimes 4.5% lately. I'm paying a little bit higher maybe than I could go get at a commercial bank loan at 3% or something. But the longevity of these relationships and this kind of thing, like, could I call that person and 2 weeks from now we're going to do business again together? Is that kind of thing. And you can't underestimate the value of that trust you have in one another. And it's also fun too. Like I love the fact that my professor I talked about earlier, 18 years later, I'm still paying his retirement account money, and he's using that money, he and his wife, to pay their grocery bill because we're paying interest to him on a few properties that we still have loans on with him.
Wow.
That's a pretty cool feeling, knowing that we're helping each other out.
I love it. Well, I'm sure there's a lot of folks listening that want to find out more about you and some of the resources that you have, and maybe even get in contact with you. What's the best way for folks to do that?
Online, I live at coachcarson.com. You can find my articles. I have a big archive of articles there and guides. I have a podcast you can find there. And if you search Coach Carson on YouTube, I have a channel. I'm spending a lot of time on that, publishing a new video every week. So any one of those three are great, and be happy to connect with you, and hope you'll comment on some of the blogs or the articles or the videos, and would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and I can attest to the quality stuff. I mean, these are not just 500-word articles. You go into depth, and it's amazing. I'm going, where do you get the time to do all this stuff? This guy, hyper, man, unbelievable. Yeah. Well, great, man. Well, we have a tradition here that all of our guests have to be subject to, unfortunately, here. It is called closing us out with your best old hound dog howl. Now, I know, the Carolinas have all kinds of hound dogs out there. A lot of people hunting and stuff.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And so I know you can do this. I could probably
just open the window and let you hear my neighbor's dog barking or howling right now.
No, you can't get off the hook that easy.
No.
Okay. All right. Are you ready?
Ow!
All right.
That's a tick hound. That's a tick
It was
hound.
a little subdued.
I need that. You did catch me off guard on that one, but that's pretty cool.
That's all right. Well, Chad, it has been awesome having you on. Great stuff, man. I like the fact that you speak fast because we are able to fit a lot into a short little podcast here. It's fantastic.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Bill.
Well, it's been all my pleasure. And I want to thank all our old dog listeners out there, too, for joining us. I know there's a lot of other things you could be doing right now, but the fact that you've taken the time to join us means a lot. Please note everything that Coach Chad here brought to us will be outlined in detail with links and all that stuff on our website at theolddogsreinetwork.com/blog area. And you're going to look for the episode with Chad Carson. Well, that's the show for today. Remember, cash flow is king and real estate investing the means. Until next time, keep moving forward and may God bless.
Thank you very much for visiting the Old Dogs REI Network. We would greatly appreciate if you would stop by iTunes and let us know what you think of the show. We would love if you could subscribe to the podcast, give us a 5-star rating, and write a review. The more ratings and reviews we receive, the more visible the podcast will be to others. Thank you.